I wanted to delve into Jewish mysticism with you in the beginning. And, we've been talking here about kind of, I guess, direct religious experience. And my instinct is that, all religions have this facet, but in the West, it's been very associated with kind of Eastern religions since the 60s. And I feel like in the Western traditions, it's maybe a bit more hidden or not as in contemporary Judaism, Christianity, Islam, it doesn't seem to be as at the forefront. Is that something that you feel as well?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly that was how I was raised. And as I continued to climb the ladder or go down the stairs or spread out, whatever the image, because I had a direct experience, I felt like I was in the wilderness in terms of being able to actually share that with other people, right? I was actually, I felt bashful and ashamed because that was something that we did not really talk about, right? Here is the liturgy, here is the ritual, here is the communal moment, but the thing that we're pointing to, right, the capital YU, is not really something that we want to approach. So that was always strange to me, even when going into intensive learning environments, the yeshiva environment. It continued to be mostly relational in terms of the people who are there, the relationship between the students and the teachers, the desire to increase knowledge, the desire to think more deeply, more analytically, even to adorn it with beauty and joy, not just like a rote intellectual exercise, but the discussion of direct mystical or spiritual experience, at least in my context, was not something we explored. And I began to understand, because I had people in different communities, right? People in Hasidic communities that were influenced or had a direct lineage with 18th, 19th century ecstatic Eastern European traditions, or people who had been influenced by Kabbalistic traditions. These people tend to be more on the small c conservative side, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox. Those communities that had not been completely or mostly assimilated by Western scientific culture, that it had not been demanded upon them. And so, right, I began to kind of branch out to be in my liberal, rational community, but also to feel out what it was like to be in these other states and other places. And I felt at home everywhere, but then also felt at home nowhere. Like, how do I be myself, someone who knows that there is the potential to access this realm of the beyond, but at the same time want to be feminist or want to be anti-racist, or the things that are part of culture of these places. And so, yeah, at home and alone at the same time. But now I'd say in 2020, that there is much more of a move in liberal Jewish contexts, in neo-Hasidic contexts, for there to be much more blending with mystical traditions and liberal rationalism, right? There's some sort of meeting point that is happening. And I think it's really about the access of these texts and these traditions, because, for Judaism, for Jewish practice, for Jewish tradition, these, our most sacred, most beloved mystical texts are in highly self-referential, Aramaic and not impossible Hebrew, but things that are more challenging than straightforward biblical Hebrew. But with the work of translators, with the work of really great academic work as well, that it's becoming more available to more people, and they're able to take those gems, take those ideas, and sublimate them into who they are, and then creating some new form. So that's really exciting. That has not been the case. Like, just for example, the primary text of Jewish mysticism, the Zohar, either written in the 2nd century by Shimon Bar Yochai, the great hero of the Zohar, or written in the 14th century by Moses de Leon, Spanish mystic, or maybe the other way around, time travel. But that has only been available completely in English. I think it was completed only about 2 years ago. So it's a massive work. It's the core of the tradition, and it only now is being available on people's bookshelves. So we're going to see massive change happening.
Right, and would you say this is a big part of your work, is trying to recover this kind of mystical strand in Judaism?
I'd say yes, only because I'm not a scholar of Jewish mysticism or Kabbalah. I'm much more at home in a verb table in biblical Hebrew, or in Near Eastern parallel law texts. That was my training, or with the Septuagint, right? All of these ancient texts. But when I came to see that what was really speaking to me was the desire to create the conditions in which I could have that kind of apprehension, that direct experience again, I knew that I had to turn toward these mystical texts, which are about creating the conditions, the preparation, the exploration, and the integration of these states of consciousness. So then I've turned toward great teachers, people who have done the translating work, people who have been in this world for years and years. I even started producing podcasts of what I think are some of the greatest teachers of our generation, some of them young, some of them elders, emerging and established, because of the power and potential that they hold for all people, not just Jewish people, but all people, and specifically now in a therapeutic context. I think that there's not just speculation about the divine realm, right, as another intellectual exercise, but what these texts and traditions hold for understanding a person's place in the world, the doubt and surety, the pain and the elation, the bliss and the confusion, and how one might actually be able to live a good life of meaning with all of these things being true. And I think that is really what the mystical tradition holds for us right now.
Right, that's a really good point, because unlike the versions of Western religion that a lot of us are taught in schools, which are very kind of heaven is very dissociated and just kind of off in the clouds, or God is this very disembodied other thing that you'll never come into contact with. All these mystical traditions seem to have in common a feeling of kind of the immanence of God or ultimate reality, or whatever you want to call it, just in existence. It's here right now, and you can get in touch with it. And I think because it's so embodied in that way, it has real world consequences getting in touch with it. As we see with psychedelic medicine, these states can resolve physical issues, psychological issues. It's spiritual states really, when they're directly experienced, are deeply embodied and have real world consequences, I guess. But you were mentioning about the texts, and in Jewish mysticism is studying the texts and kind of performing the traditions outlined in them. Is that a big part of Jewish mysticism?
Studying the texts and then following some of the practices? Absolutely. One piece that we haven't talked about yet is also having a teacher, and also being part of a community. In some ways, we're talking about an individual having access to a text, reading it, understanding it, and going and doing something. That is certainly part of it, and certainly now, when it becomes available in translation, you might not feel like you need a teacher. But Kabbalah, the word for Hebrew mysticism generally, or the Jewish mysticism, the Hebrew word means reception. And so even that word implies some relational quality, that it is something that is received from another source. It might not necessarily be self-generated. It could be by very special people, but the idea of transmission as the way of being able to actually play in this world is key. And so, yes, the studying of text is important. The contemplation, the making connections between texts, and playing with letters is certainly a part of this tradition. It's playful, it's imaginative, and what I think happens also is that there are then the influence on what we call nomian practice, right? The standard established prayer services, the rituals, the mitzvot, the holy acts that we do, then become imbued with, I'd say, omni-significance. That, right, it's not merely that I am, let's say, wrapping black leather boxes with black straps on my arm and my head because it says in the Torah and then rabbinic tradition, you're supposed to do this every day. What I then learn from these texts is that I'm actually binding upon myself the feminine presence of the divine in this world. Right? That I think is a major shift from I'm doing this thing, which is my obligation, and it's important and significant because it's part of this relationship, versus I have the feminine presence of the divine upon me, and then to sit in that relational space. Right, so immanence, I think radical immanence then is what we're talking about. It's not only on my body, but in my body. And so embodiment then I think becomes really significant. It's not only just the learning of text, but then the living of the texts itself. And so in that way, right, it becomes more playful, more dramatic, and more inward. So I think that I think could excite many more people today than it being something removed, abstract, and distant.